everybody. Welcome to the festival and welcome to this session. My name's Sue, and I'm sure everyone remembers exactly what they were doing on the 23rd of February 1999. To give you a few examples, Eminem was out celebrating after the release of his inaugural album Slim Shady. John Prescott was enjoying a hot pie after opening a 15-mile stretch of the M1 north of Leeds, which is still magnificent to this very day. And I remember exactly what I was doing. I was in my living room at my parents' house in Croydon, watching Queer as Folk and explaining to my rather conservative mother what rimming was. Which is a conversation that is still ongoing. It's very much ongoing. I'm really delighted to be welcomed by to welcome this most splendid of panels. Look at them. We've got Nicola Shindler, who was at the time the producer and exec producer of Queer as Folk, the originator, the writer, the font, Russell T Davies, Drag Race Supremo, Courtney Act, and activist, journalist, and author Owen Jones. Welcome, everybody. So, first of all, take me through the genesis of the show. How did it come about? What are the first seeds?
Well, we met. We met before we started with
Canal Street.
Not quite. It was New York. It was quite glamorous. Yeah. But we met and talked, and I really wanted to work with Russell. I loved Russell's writing. And when I set up Red, Channel 4 wanted to work with Russell as well. So Gub Neal and Katrina Mackenzie at Channel 4 suggested that we get together. And you already had in your head the formation of the series.
And I've been working on soaps at Granada, and daytime soaps and nighttime soaps, and gayness was just boiling out of everything. I did a lesbian vicar, and I did a gay schoolboy, and all these soaps no one's ever heard of. They've been out at strange times of night, but it was just more and more and more, and it was writing what you know and writing who you are, and that was a very wise woman at Channel 4 called Katrina Mackenzie, who said, you write that well, you write that better than your other stuff.
It's boiling out of you.
It's boiling out of you. It's like, never mind explaining rimming to your mother. My mother and father, my father was blind, and my mother had to describe everything that was happening on screen.
She audio described
I never
Nathan.
asked what happened that night. Just draw a veil over that. Can you imagine?
Before we carry on, let's remind, as if you need reminding, let's remind you all the magnificence of this series.
That was as long as the actual programme.
That was an odyssey, it really was. Just to give this some context, the year Queer as Folk aired, just 27% of Britons thought sexual relationships between two adults of the same sex was not wrong, according to British Social Attitude Survey. Thanks for that. Nearly half the population thought it was always or mostly wrong. So, Courtney and Owen, 1999, what were you guys doing?
I was living in Brisbane with my family. I was 17, and I remember, I think my story is like many teens watching Queer as Folk. Mum and Dad were upstairs. My bedroom was downstairs. I didn't have a remote control yet. They hadn't been invented, at least not in Brisbane, Australia. And I just remember standing by the television with my finger on the channel change, sort of watching the stairs, watching the television, watching the stairs, watching the television. With a hard-on.
That's wow, watching the television, watching the hard-on, watching the stairs, watching the hard-on.
One hand on the television, I won't tell you where the other one was.
No.
But I just remember being amazed and in awe of what I saw on the television, because I'd never witnessed anything like that. I mean, I think we had dial-up internet and bulletin board services with in episode 1.
Yes, the way it's
loading the porn like that. That's what it was like. So, Queer as Folk was a much quicker outcome.
Route.
Yeah.
Yes. Quicker route.
Really felt the tone starting off.
Your engagement with the show.
Blimey. Firstly, what a panel of queer deities. I'm doing it. I'm really doing it. I grew up 6 miles away from Canal Street, and culturally, it just felt like a different universe. It was like coming up for air, Queer as Folk. I was a 14-year-old boy, very closeted, didn't come out for another 6 years. And it was the same story. Every teenage boy, if they were about 13, 14, 15, had that kind of... I remember we had this second TV in another room, which was from the 1970s, and you're worried, if you turn it on, would it just explode? And it took ages to warm up. And you'd hide, you'd turn the volume down. But what was so fascinating about it was that... Because I remember the oppressive level of homophobia that I grew up in the community I grew up in. I grew up near the centre of Stockport. And bear in mind, this was only a decade after the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police said that HIV victims were swirling around in a human cesspool of their own making. We had Section 28 in place, which was only introduced a decade earlier, the first homophobic bit of legislation introduced for generations, which forbid the so-called promotion of homosexuality. And so schools in practice didn't have LGBT education. Yeah. The only time we heard about it in class was when the head teacher said how bad anal sex was for you.
And out of nowhere?
I just threw it in. We were doing maths at the time.
It was a geography lesson. Straight from Oxbow Lakes to anal sex.
And
there was no room at the inn.
Yeah, and the anti-gay laws were all in place. You know, there was no equal partnership, let alone equal marriage. Yeah. You could be discriminated against, and the intensity of that homophobia. You know, I indulged in it. You know, like a lot of gay guys. You know, because anyone who deviated from what it was to be a man had to. You know, calling people gay, whether if they weren't sporty enough, didn't get into enough fights. It was just so rampant and suffocating. And this was like, you know, if you see homophobia, I see it as like an authoritarian regime with these unspoken rules that's enforced through abuse and intimidation and even violence. And this was like being in a prison cell and this note being slipped in, you know, that and that, you know, that there was freedom, there was potential freedom.
And the feeling that you're not alone as well, and that's what great television does, is you see a representation of yourself, your community, your friends, your outlook. And that had been what was so missing from the
because it's
LGBTQ plus landscape. Yeah.
It's so lonely when you're not out to a single person on it. You're struggling to come out to yourself. And to see these people living their lives and being happy, and you know, and it you know, when you think at that time, you think, oh God, this future's been snatched away. I won't have wife and kids and all the things I'm told, and I'll be miserable for the rest of my life. It transformed, I think, for a lot of people who were very miserable. A lot of young LGBTQ people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, properly, thank you. And as you say, 1999, Section 28 still in place, repealed in Scotland in 2000, being more enlightened folk, and 2003 in England, I believe. You presumably knew that the show was going to get a lot of press and a lot of heat. Were you surprised how quickly the negativity faded?
Well, I think we had a different reaction to it because you were more aware of what was going to happen. I kind of just went for the story. So for me, this was a fantastic story about unrequited love, about friendship, about people at a certain age. It was relevant and it was valid because it was a great story. And I presumed people would look at it for its own worth, whereas you were aware that people came with an agenda very early on.
We also kind of thought, when we were out on Canal Street shooting it, there was also a slight assumption it would kind of disappear. You know, because Channel 4 was showing like Derek Jarman films late at night. We went out at 10. They shifted it from 10 o'clock till 10:30, and that's when we thought we were doomed. Yeah. We kind of went, oh, well, no one's going to watch that then. They promised us 10 o'clock, saw the sex scenes, and I can't criticise them because they backed us completely with the show, but they slightly chickened out and said, let's make this 10:30. So there was also an assumption it was going to be the equivalent of a Channel 4 documentary about the defenestration of Prague. It's like, it wasn't going to work.
Erotic in its own way.
Come on. What a window that was.
Yeah.
So although it hit a lot of fuss and it hit a lot of nonsense, it was also delightful because actually you make things to be seen. And actually, if there is a bit of a fuss, hooray, that's a great fuss to have. So it was also joyous. You can talk about the problems of it a lot, but we don't talk about the joy of it enough. It was lovely.
And from that first press launch, we had people sat on the stairs, and that was when we were kind of went, oh, people are really taking notice.
Yes, you had something like 200 journalists when you normally...
But the press launch was extraordinary. It was a room like this with 200 people, 199 of them against it. With the most hostile questioning, and largely the gay press as well. So, and there's a reason behind the arguments. I'm not having a go at people, but the gay press was largely going, why haven't you mentioned HIV? Why doesn't he say he's had safe sex? Like, hello, I've just had safe sex with Nathan. It's like, you know, that is safe sex. He just didn't say it. It's obviously safe sex. But they were, you know, there's a big agenda behind that. There was ferocious anger at that. One person in the auditorium put his hand up and said, I like this, and that was Boyd Hilton from Heat magazine. Is he here? We'll never forget, did that.
A wonderful champion, I have to say.
And also, not just, but he genuinely, that Heat magazine was brand new, like that week practically, and that was a young audience and a young readership and a trendy readership, and that was genuinely like a ray of hope, like, oh, there is an audience.
How did the show, I mean, when you think of that show and how electrifying it was for the UK audiences, how on earth did the US show come about? I mean, we customarily believe that the US is more traditional, more conservative. How did that
Basically, we
generate?
were ripped off like fuck and they paid us tuppence. But there we go, is that the story we can tell? Can we do that
Really?
one? How honest are we today?
It was before we owned our own rights. Yeah. So Channel 4 owned the rights, before independents owned rights. So Channel 4 owned the rights.
There's still pain here, I'm sensing.
Yeah.
Lots
I
of pain.
can bear a grudge for 20 years.
So Channel 4 sold the rights to American producers, who then did talk to you.
We were delighted it happened, because it's like, it ran for 5 years.
And it's a very different show.
Yeah, so actually it had a longer sort of journey in the States. Oh. And what was the difference? Did they water down the sexual content?
Oh, no, I would say...
No, there's tons of that. They literally couldn't make Nathan 15, he had to be 17. They just went, legally, we can't. I don't know why that matters legally. People get shot in dramas. That's not legal. But Agatha Christie should be in prison. But it's like they just...
I'm still furious about that.
Yes. They just couldn't, and they were very honest about that from the start. But then they were very faithful. They were very lovely to us, actually, about it. Yeah.
And the impact of the show has not only been felt, across all sort of strands of programming and culturally had a wide impact, but also on the shows that Red has made. We're going to have a little look at the shows that followed Queer as Folk. I'd like to start talking about representation in soaps, if I may. Am I right, Russell? You were a lead writer on...
I was a storyline Coronation Street, and I wrote one 90-minute special in which Jack and Vera went to Las Vegas, which was appalling.
No!
So bad. Yes, but yeah.
But soaps, are a great way to bring new, challenging, interesting subject matter into the domestic environment night after night after night. And how important do you think that getting strong and proper representation in soaps is?
Well, it's great. I mean, if anything, they've led the way. The ferocious casting of gay actors in gay roles. And, every time we draw up lists of how many gay characters or lesbians are on television, we kind of exclude the soaps, which are doing Hollyoaks. You can't move for them. It's like...
Are you saying there's too many gays?
Never.
But they do.
I mean, what soaps discovered before anyone else, way ahead of Hollywood, is the marvelous thing about diversity is that it's opened up great big toy boxes of new stories, and in every drama and every soap, you're just essentially telling love stories. But once you start to make that diverse, once you cross races and cross genders and cross sexualities, then stories just come alive. I've worked on a children's drama at Granada. Granada was a fantastically gay place to work and very supportive. And that was the children's drama that went out of 440, and we did an HIV story in there. And the marvelous thing about that, it was a kid with HIV. I wish I'd had the nerve to make him gay, but it was 1991 or something, so having HIV was a strong enough story in itself. With hindsight, I'd have made him gay. But what you're doing is what it was. You're telling a Romeo and Juliet story. He's falling in love with a girl. HIV is the problem that comes between them. So you're telling a great story. HIV is just part of it. So you're introducing a great big subject. And soaps just roll on marvelously. They keep telling stories, and then new stories come along. So they're fantastic engines, and they are... And a direct consequence of Queer as Folk was Eileen's house in Coronation Street, where the producer, Tony Wood, an old friend of mine, a friend of ours, watched Coronation Street, watched Queer as Folk, loved Queer as Folk. He said, I want Eileen's house to be like Hazel's house. He got Anthony Cotton into Coronation Street to play the first gay character in it, and said Eileen's house is going to be a house full of lodgers like Hazel did. Eileen will be Hazel. And that's still true to this day. That house is still there. So well done, the soaps. Well done.
And is the same thing true in Australia? Do you find that soaps have started to reflect...
No.
Oh, no. Okay. Absolutely no way.
I mean, Neighbours and Home and Away are our two main soaps. Yeah. And we did have a flash in the pan in 1976. A transgender Australian woman, Carlotta, had a part on a soap playing a transgender woman, which was like 76. It was a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
And then that was it until just last year. Literally.
So 2 instances in the entirety of Australian soap programming.
Yeah. They're flat out getting a person of colour on Ramsay Street. They do have 2 queer people, two two homosexual gentlemen who did get married, which was only a recent addition to Australia as well. I do believe that next year Lassiter's will be having a float at Mardi Gras.
Oh. And when will Australia discover lesbians?
Well, Magda Szubanski was the celebrant on that episode, who is, you might know as Sharon from Kath and Kim. But yes, no lesbians as yet. But there is a cameo from a little Australian drag queen, which I'm very excited about.
Oh, in which one?
In Neighbours.
In Neighbours, yes.
This is too exciting for
Very
words.
exciting. I have been pitching I do a tour, I do a show at Lassiter's, and I haven't picked it up yet, but I'm working on it. And I'll fight for the lesbians too, Sue.
Thank
But I think that in
Fight
many...
with the lesbians.
Fight with We've been doing that for years. Let's fight for them. But I think in many ways, you really do see it in the ways it's reflected back in society. I've lived in Australia, I've lived in the US for 8 years, I've been living in the UK for the last year, and I truly believe that the UK's relationship with gender, with sexuality, with masculinity and femininity is the healthiest of those three continents. And
I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
it's a low bar. Well, it is a low bar, but it's really fascinating to be here and to live in this country and to work in this country and to observe how much pop culture has informed the people that, queer people are people too, and has explained a lot of those topics. And it's in the fabric of the society here so much more than it is in Australia or the US. And it fascinates me when I look at all the references culturally over the years.
Why?
Well, because it's been on the telly here, and people are just, it's usualised or normalised, and people understand it. Whereas, Australia has been seen as a very progressive country and is in many ways, but then we have many sort of conservative setbacks, and marriage equality only came into law last January, I think it was, and it's been a thing here for so many years. I mean, even the US beat Australia to marriage equality, which, is, as an Australian, is kind of shocking. But
For the moment.
for the moment, well, yeah.
Could all dial back.
Any moment,
Yeah.
couldn't it?
Do you agree, Owen, that the representation of LGBTQ plus individuals in soaps particularly has improved, and that is that you get a positive representation across the board?
Yeah, someone once put that just full stop, the old kind of representation of LGBTQ plus people was like minstrel shows, in the way that you'd have these racist caricatures in the 50s for the amusement of white people, you'd have these desexualized caricatures of gay people in particular. And I think, the problem for a long time, the LGBTQ world is dominated by white cisgendered men, and that for a long time was what was reflected in soaps. And I remember looking at the coverage, was it the first gay kiss was in EastEnders in 1988 or 1989. And, the Sun's coverage, honestly, I know you kind of, in a sense, you kind of desensitise, you'd expect the Sun to not necessarily be going, brilliant, more of that, please. But it's so gratuitously, venomously homophobic in response to that. And of course, there was the first lesbian kiss, which was in Brookside in the mid-90s, was a massive news story. It was kind of scandalous and debated, and it was bombarded with complaints. But what's changed now, I think, is you're getting more people in terms of on the queer spectrum. You've had more people of colour. So there is first, of course, Saeed Massoud in EastEnders, a Muslim character in 2009. They're going to have a lesbian Muslim character coming up too as well. We've got more trans people finally appearing on TV. That's very important at a time when there's a massive anti-trans hate campaign, and the trans people are receiving a sort of bile that I think gay men got in the 80s and 90s, which was legitimised by the media. So I think it is evolving. It's not just, white, cisgender, gay people. I think the problem still is, it's still the gay storyline, isn't it? It's often tragedy.
If you're a lesbian, it's death. It's early death.
Die. You will die.
The moment you decloak and go, I'm gay, there will be a white van heading towards you at speed. The moment you express love, it's one of the most basic human emotions, something dreadful will happen. But It's just the way. It's the way it's always been. But you're right, that element of tragedy. I suppose Rob Ron in Emmerdale, there's a sense that these are normal guys going about their everyday life, and it's not pathologised so much. There's not a sense of a gay pathology. But often gay characters will have deeply tortuous. Where do you stand on that, Russell? Do you think? Well, I mean, we are deeply tortuous human beings. Well, not everyone is.
It's kind of it's kind of an equality, to be honest. I mean, as a gay and lesbian LGBTQ+ audience, we will complain about this story. We'll complain about that story. The fact is, in a lot of these dramas, a lot of the straight stories are rubbish. You watch some rubbish divorces. You watch some rubbish drug addicts. You watch some rubbish teenagers falling in love. But the straight people don't rise up in arms saying that was a terrible divorce story, because they're kind of used to it. So we've got to get used to it. It's like there's going to be some stories we don't like, some stories that are told badly, some stories that are not told not the way we want, and you've got to get over it. I mean, I've happily killed gay character after gay character after gay character.
You're known for it.
Continue to do so, frankly.
That's why we call you the queer slaughterer.
But it's like kind of saying there are bad deaths. There are bad deaths.
Yes.
We can't think of anything else to do, and there's an extraordinary history on Coronation Street of young women being murdered. Truly, it's slightly out of control and needs monitoring. And it does need monitoring. Those programs are made so fast under such terrible schedules that it's very hard to keep an eye on things. But it is being monitored. People are aware of these things. It is being talked about, and I always think actually our representation is better than we think it is, to be honest. It'd be very easy to sit in this panel and say, we don't have enough stories, and we ignore half the stories that are there. There's a sitcom on E4 called The Other Two, which is tiny. I don't think many people watch it at all. It's a brilliant American sitcom that the other week did the most detailed and brilliant comedy with a gay couple about who tops and who bottoms and when you have a meal. And it was almost appalling. I'm sorry. It was the level, but the comedy they got out of it was infinitely sophisticated, and I think we could sit here and discuss gay representation on television for 3 hours and not remember to mention it. So there's a ton of stuff out there. There's a lot of. I'm very much aware that I'm sitting here as the gay writer, but even back in 1999, there were writers working on the soaps who were gay. There was Jonathan Harvey writing Gimme, Gimme, Gimme. There was that whole Bad Girls team coming. They were maybe in a year's time. They were coming out with all their great lesbian stories in Bad Girls and stuff like that. There's two writers. There was three people behind that company, three powerful women who were pushing women's stories. So there was a lot. I'm very lucky to be sitting here going, hooray, but there was a great rising of writers and ideas.
Because even when we did Butterfly last year, and on ITV, everyone seemed to forget about Hayley as a character on Coronation Street on ITV. And she was revolutionary. I mean, that was extraordinary that she was just...
The revolutions have to keep on happening, because every time in America, they're making a bisexual Batwoman, and there's a television series, which is great, and they cast a bisexual actor, but they're all going, it's the first bisexual lead hero in a programme ever, and I'm sitting there going, I did Torchwood with John Barrowman, you couldn't be more out. It's like Captain Jack was so bisexual, and I get a bit pissed off sometimes. I sit there going, that was 2006. It's a long time, but they get forgotten, and you have to remind people there's a revolution every single time, but that's no bad thing, as long as they keep happening.
In age of representation, how do we feel about straight actors playing gay roles? What is the panel's feeling on that?
I think that, there's obviously a lot of conversations about, individuals representing their own community on film, whether that be, disabled people or queer people, trans people playing trans roles and so on. And I think that at the moment, I think it's important because you get that truth of the representation. And also historically, queer people have been shut out of the entertainment industry. There's been so much closeting of queerness in order to get a role, because if you come out as queer, you won't be able to play a straight person and things like that. And so I think until the time that equality is greater, it's wonderful to see queer people accurately representing their own experience.
I think that's it. I think it wouldn't be such a problem if it wasn't for the fact that being an openly gay actor can be so challenging and difficult, and lots of actors, and we all know lots of actors who think to themselves, if I come out, I won't be able to play a leading male role, for example. I won't. And there've been exceptions in the Star Trek film. What's his name?
Oh, yes, Zach Quinto.
Zach Quinto, exactly. So that has begun to change, I think. But I think the problem is you get so many gay actors who are struggling to get work, and if they came out, would feel that they get pigeonholed all of a sudden, wouldn't be able to play a straight role whilst, and I think it's particularly problematic with trans actors. I think given how challenging it can be for trans characters trans actors to get work, the fact that you get lots of cisgendered people playing taking that work, I think that's the problem, isn't it?
There's one area of television in which representation is extremely strong. Let's have a look at this clip. Beautiful. So, light entertainment programming, where I think there's a very strong sense of representation, but it comes, I think, sometimes with its own pitfalls. Courtney, that Dancing with the Stars moment, the first sort of same-sex partnership, extraordinary for television. What was it like to actually inhabit?
It was a wonderful opportunity, and it was particularly wonderful, as much as I would love to be on Strictly, it was particularly wonderful doing it in Australia, where I grew up with the people, that I saw, the people that I grew up with sort of watching me on telly do that and represent myself and my community. And it was just that wonderful thing where, all those kids that I went to school with that, bullied or didn't, or I wasn't, it's that thing in the 90s in school. There was poofter and faggot, and I didn't really know what they meant, but I knew that they weren't good words, and therefore I didn't really have any reference for myself. And it was just really cool to know that this was on television. There was young queer people in Australia watching this, and also the people that I grew up with watching it. And I kind of got to, it was a bit of a full circle moment for me. And getting to be the first same-sex couple in the Anglosphere, doing a performance, doing a show like that. And then also, I think it was around episode 8 or 9, I performed out of drag with my dance partner Josh. So visually, two men dancing together was oddly more controversial than being in drag and performing with a man, because I think visually it's not as confronting, but I just loved the idea. And I remember the first time I saw a tango, two men doing a tango, I found it revolutionary in my own mind, because I just didn't know you could do that. I didn't know two men could dance together and be passionate towards each other. And to get the opportunity to do that on television was just amazing. And to think of all of those people at home just being like, oh, I didn't know you, oh yeah, guess so. Oh, I got a 10. Yeah, must be all right.
Owen, why do you think that hasn't happened on Strictly or any of the iterations of those shows here?
Do you know what? That actually really shocks me. And they use the shield of the institution of ballroom dancing as an excuse, and I believe that it is an excuse. And I just don't understand. And I thought that after, myself being on Dancing with the Stars, that perhaps that could have opened some doors in the UK or the US, but it hasn't seemed to yet. And it's just weird, because you think, like I said, the UK to me seems like so much of a more evolved place, and when it comes to sexuality and gender. And I guess maybe they think the demographic of Strictly skews older and that they wouldn't be that able to relate to it. I don't actually know the reason. I think it just needs to happen. I think people will be quite surprised at how positively it's received.
I think you're right. I think it's instead of looking at the... You didn't look at the demographic when you made Queer as Folk. You made a story that you wanted to tell that needed so urgently to be told. And I think the same needs to happen with Strictly. Whatever, you just do it. And with all these things. Do you think the time is right, Owen? Do you think we'll see a same-sex pairing in Strictly, or is that the last taboo?
The last taboo. Well, I think we're going through so many milestones, full stop, aren't we, in terms of, when sports figures started coming out. We still don't have that, for example, in professional football. But we've got to realise we've had so many... from the first gay kiss, the first pioneering gay kiss to the first trans characters. And that is one of the last, we've come so far, but we've got to remember we only came this far because of the struggle of LGBTQ people that opened up the cultural space, that kind of created the permission, the possibility for the amazing work, for example, of yourselves. And that struggle still has a long way to go. And it's almost the kind of... it's almost kind of the kind of cultural side just reflects, if you like, the fact that we haven't won the full struggle in society as a whole. As soon as we've done that, then you will get the full gamut on television.
I'd love to see that personally. I'd love to see everybody dancing with everybody, always. But that's just me.
And also, It's never quite as bad as we think. That's a programme with 2 openly gay judges, lots of openly gay contestants and lesbian contestants, and it's gay full stop. Just look at it. So it's like...
Yeah, it's a pretty gay
It could be
petri
better.
dish,
I
isn't it?
absolutely agree with you. It could be better, but it's not bad. It's,
Oh no! Listen, it's a great show. I mean,
Yeah,
I think what that show represents is
And 2 female hosts. That's the only programme on television with 2 female hosts. Well done. That's genuinely a milestone. So
yeah. No,
tries.
it's certainly not a strictly It's more of a sort of air of curiosity actually as to why, because as you say, it's an incredibly open
It'll happen.
space. I think it will happen. Come on, sure.
Get her on.
I'm allowed to enter it twice.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would.
Russell says so.
It's the television
Why
festival. We say yes.
Why not? Why not? We've got a question that's come through. Yes.
Wow.
This is tracking back to Chris. If you were to make the show today, what would you do differently? What would be the changes that you would make?
It'd be a more ethnically diverse cast, absolutely it would. And right now it's got that gay thing. And I'm not. I don't look back and criticise the show because I love the show that we made in 1999. Right now in the programmes that Nicola and I are making, we cast gay as gay. It's just these years. It might be different in 5 years' time. It was certainly different 10 years ago. But right now in what we do, we cast gay as gay, which is hard. It's also coming back to that subject. It's hard when you think you're not allowed to ask if an actor is gay. That's quite right too. That's an employment rule. If I was in Tesco's, I can't ask someone trying to be a cashier if they're gay or not. You're not allowed to do it. And you kind of laugh and think you know if an actor's gay or not. No, you don't. We don't know 99% of actors. And so that's a very delicate area. We have to say, if you're happily going to identify as gay, we'd like you to audition, but you can't insist on it. So it's very, very... We've got a very good casting director called Andy Pryor who very delicately negotiates all this, but it's not easily done. Also, let's be honest, I work with actors who say they're straight and they're out having the runner behind the bushes. They're gay as can be. It's like, it's really not easy to...
There are so many rooms they could use.
Yes. So it's not easy.
I know, it's true, but sometimes open air is best.
Let it breathe.
Yes, so you've definitely more. Yes, I mean
More diversity,
more
yeah.
diverse cast. But thankfully we've come a long way in terms of diversity on screen.
And it sounds like I'm criticising that cast there, and of course, how brave were those boys to take those parts on? It's like at the time, and they were completely unworried by it and happy. So
yes, but Aidan and Charlie just inhabited with literally gay abandon that, and so it's hard retrospectively to criticise the fact that they were straight guys, because there's a real commitment, isn't
they acted and they believed in it and they were passionate about what they did. And also what you were saying about actors then struggled even more because we talked to some people in auditions who were gay, who were going to struggle with playing gay on screen because they were terrified that they'd lose their career.
People wouldn't
So
come in.
and there was agents last minute phone calls saying they just can't come in, it's too big a risk. And it was a risk, and it's only 20 years ago that they would not be cast again.
And we did cast Anthony Cotton and Adam Zane.
Who apparently is gay.
Jonathan.
Is he?
Is he?
God.
But if you look at openly gay actor now, would you ever be able to play a romantic lead as a straight person? I
Andrew Scott.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm wrong then.
I mean, I know.
Fleabag.
Russell Tovey gets cast.
Yeah, Russell.
But it's still risky. A lot of people would consider themselves typecast.
I mean, we've got a new show now, and we're casting gays gay. The choice of actors is vast
extraordinary.
now compared
And that's
to
young actors.
That's a
really
change in
young
20
actors,
years. Young actors, it's like we're spoilt for choice with them. It's really.
But you've created the
glorious.
environment where there isn't that stigma.
Well,
You've
not
created
said, the world got better. We were a bit of it, but it's
the-
like, yeah, we did it.
part of it. It's just easier. It's easier.
Will you please stop?
Is it too late
Love
to change
Mum.
the moderator?
Of gay syndrome.
Have you really had sex in a bush, Sue? Oh, shut up. How have brands and advertisers' attitudes to the LGBTQ plus community evolved? How important is that? Didn't Bex originally pull out? So you had Bex as sponsors. So what happened? I mean, presumably, as sponsors, they are entitled to see advanced copies or screeners or see them in
I don't think they were. No.
They
They don't sponsor Queer as Folk. They sponsor drama on Channel 4. So they had committed to drama on Channel 4, and we went out with the first 4 episodes, sponsored by Bex, and then all we were told was Fraulein Beck had watched.
Fraulein Beck?
had
No
come
way.
to-
Beck's daughter was in London.
She'd watched it in a
Your
hotel room.
papers are not in order.
And got straight on the phone, And then-
Warte, there's bumps and daisies.
What is this rimming?
And it was pulled, and we were told to say, Bex had rearranged their
A
European
financial,
funding.
yeah, it was their financial.
But so you have to basically own their shame for them by kind of providing an excuse.
It wasn't Channel 4's fault at all, and Channel 4 needed that sponsorship across. Though I think if something like that happened now, the reaction would be very different.
It does happen, though. It's like Broadchurch was sponsored by a cruise line thing, and then in one episode of Broadchurch, a boat was set on fire. They pulled out their advertising. So it's like, it happens. It's a bit, they don't see the programmes beforehand. It is interesting. It's a funny old situation.
But presumably now, and with the collaboration that you have, sponsors will be very aware of the sort of the
No, because
content.
on the second year, they came back to us saying, will you allow Bex back in? The Channel 4 came to us saying, we've got... What happened?
I can't remember, but I remember...
I think we said no, didn't we?
I think, yeah.
I think we had a meeting saying, hello, this is Mr. Bex, some poor man from Bex who was sent along.
What had happened to Fraulein Beck?
Fraulein Bex!
We made up Fraulein Beck. All we know is his daughter, but in our head, she was Fraulein Beck.
And they had to come to us saying, please, will you allow us to sponsor it again?
I think it had, there'd been backlash because they clearly had sponsored half of a series and then taken the sponsorship
It was a gay
away.
backlash. I love a gay backlash.
Let's just spend a minute thinking about that.
I'll give you a backlash with my pony.
Let's move closer, Sue.
That is, I know I'm doing a lot of leaning. I think, what are we on? We've got about 10 minutes, so I might take some questions from the floor. That seems appropriate. I'm going to, rather than doing it through an app, I'm a little old-fashioned, and I think it's pretty cool to just raise a hand and bellow, if you don't mind doing that. Hello there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask really for Russell as a writer.
Oh,
Hello.
Not that old.
You were projecting very well.
I thought your diaphragmatic breathing was...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just a question for Russell, really, as a writer, just to follow on what Sue, you were talking about, sort of lesbian deaths. And Russell, you touched on it, but I thought it'd be interesting to talk about it a little bit more. And that's the struggling with representation versus the need to generate drama, right? And how to keep people interested, and how drama works is in conflict. So, and I know that was something that you sort of ran into during Queer as Folk. The idea that, you want to have certain representations, but how do you make them interesting stories, right? How do you get that drama when you're trying to balance against representation, basically?
I mean, it's a tricky one. It's the eternal question in a way. And to be absolutely blunt, I don't worry about it. It's like, if I worried about it, I would never kill a gay character, because there were people lining up to say, you can never kill a gay character. It's homophobic to do that. So that's what's glorious about working with Nicola, is that we don't have that filter at all of representation. I mean, there are the ghosts of representation in Queer as Folk. There are lesbian characters on the periphery. There's Bernie, who's an older gay man. There's Anthony Cotton as the camp man, who are on the sidelines. But it's not actually about them. And you've just got to put it to this. I mean, I was recently had years and years. We made years and years for BBC One, in which I think there was a gay brother and his husband and the man he had an affair with, and then there was the lesbian sister and her girlfriend, and I think their sexuality was absolutely irrelevant to that story, and they had bigger stories to tell.
It was neatly done, that.
So you've really got to ignore it. You've got to ignore it in everything you're ever writing. It doesn't matter what race you might be or what background. At the same time, it's both things at once. There's no simple answer to this, because at the same time, I am being gay and I am standing there and I am aware that this show will be taken as representation and I will be determined to make that good. So it's you've got to juggle both, as ever. That's writing. Writing is always juggling 57 things at once. It's never writing one thing.
And
any sort of answer? I don't know.
I think it was all the answers.
Okay.
It's all good. Any more questions?
Thank you.
Hi there. Towards the back, thank you, in the middle. We'll just get a mic to you.
Yeah, I'll just shout.
You could just, I know, I'm
Should
a
have
great
music
fan
playing
of shouting.
while music
Thank you.
Hello.
It's a point of order to Owen, actually. You said there are no professional footballers who are openly gay. There are many female professional footballers who are...
Good point. Very good point. Very good point.
And that we've seen some wonderful ones.
Yeah, sorry, I should have said men. You're absolutely right.
World Cup winning Megan Rapinoe for one.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. I watched that in a bar in Barcelona, and it was just thrilling on about 7 different levels.
That's a very big bar.
It's a great bar. Great bar.
Sorry, just a question for Russell. What do you think the 2019 version of those kind of gay sex scenes and queer as folk would be? What's the ultimate taboo still to be busted?
Oh my God.
Well, that's asking you to really dig deep.
Woo!
I'm 56 years old. I don't know anymore.
I've got a few ideas.
Should we all just brainstorm and see what we come up with?
I'd be very happy to. I think this room needs it.
What a filthy question. Who are you? Where's your
Let's
mother?
turn it back.
For God's
What
sake.
do you think? What do
you think? What would you do?
What sex
Not now,
act would you
personally.
like to
Although now, personally, if you want. It's like...
I was just wondering.
Your voice is
It's working.
That was super.
More transgender sex scenes. Would that
Yeah. Actually, yes, transgender sex scenes are. Do they exist? Where's that ever happened? Sense8. Great scene. Yeah. Freema's in that.
Oh, crap.
Lovely Freema's in that, yeah.
Okay, so any other sexual questions for Russell, or are you sort of gone, moving into some Jeremy Kyle territory now? but with
What happened
adverbs.
to him?
Any more questions?
This one over there.
No?
Oh, sorry.
Man there.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Russell. Have you or would you consider getting the three main actors back together to do what are they doing now, 20 years on?
Yeah, kind of, not really. I mean, I did a show called Cucumber, which was about men in their late 40s, 50s, about what life is like now. And you'd just be disappointed, wouldn't you? Imagine creaking their way along Canal Street. Bless them.
Old Stuart.
Saying, what sex scenes can we do that are new? Dear me. It's like Stuart and... Yes, but then again, never say never. Give me £1 million, Channel 4, and I'll be there. So it's like, drive the money truck up to my house. Like, yeah, I've got a great idea. I think that those reunion shows are often disappointing, aren't they? It's like I don't know. Maybe a charity thing or something, but it's like, yeah.
A charity thing?
Well, you know,
a charity quiz? Well, like a telethon. Going, if you'd like to see Nathan
24
get into a sex scene.
24-hour rim.
Someone's going to buy that, and you're going to regret saying that. I do think do we got time for one more question?
Yeah.
Let's do that. One more question. It doesn't even have to be about sexual acts. It could be about wider narrative structures or representation. Just to give you a hint. Hello there. We'll get a mic to you, darling.
Got the mic, I think. I produced Orange Is Not the Only Fruit.
Oh, great. I'll come to you in a second. Sorry,
I think it was the first underage lesbian sex scene.
Amazing.
And very supported by Mark Shivers, who was the gay head of drama at the time. And I just wondered, when you were in the cutting room, Nicola and Russell, did you feel you needed that kind of support when you were actually cutting those scenes?
Yeah, and we got a lot of support. Gub Neil was the head of drama at Channel 4 at the time, and he was pushing us not to go further just with the sex scenes, but with everything. He was absolutely open to however the story went.
What they wanted. Yeah.
I think we might have made a few trims to certain scenes.
At one point, it went to some supreme overlord of Channel 4.
Yeah, it
never
wasn't
been heard of before or since. Like Lord something.
Yeah.
Lord something.
Yeah.
Lord Rimmer.
Is he still... And he said, can you cut back on these sex scenes? So actually we trimmed little tiny bits out of it, which actually we knew made it more powerful.
Yeah.
It's more of a sharp punch. And well done on that show, by the way.
Just a beautiful piece of work. And rather remiss of us not to mention it, actually, in the Pantheon.
That should be on the iPlayer. Is that on the iPlayer? It's like start a campaign.
I'd love to.
Amazing.
I would love to.
Still
Oh
great.
God, and extraordinary. So we missed a question. We've got one final question. If we could just move the mic.
There's a lady here.
And there's a lady there.
Okay.
We'll come to you in a bit. We've still got a bit of time.
Hi.
I can't even see the
very
clock,
quick
I'm so
question,
blind.
actually. So they've recently announced the reboot of the US version of Queer as Folk. So I was just wondering if there was anything that you could share about that and if you're involved.
They're still furious about the lack of royalties. Absolutely livid.
It's kind of, bless them, they're a lovely team. It's kind of in development. These things get announced and they run away. It might not exist. It's with Bravo and it's with their streaming, but they're a year off from anything happening. We're kind of just politely involved, aren't we?
Yeah, so we read what they write, and we met with the man, Stephen
Dunn.
Who's a
Good
young
guy.
filmmaker who came to us in Manchester and said, could he do it?
And it's going to be a lot more diverse.
It's not related to Our Queer as Folk in any way. He wanted the title. It's about a group of young American it's a community, yeah, it's friends, and so it's not related to our characters. He just wanted it to carry the same feel.
So we hope it happens, but we're just politely connected to him. He's a lovely man. Yeah.
We've got time for one more, at the very, very front, who you can probably... Oh, no, we'll get a mic to you. It's
There
all
we
good.
go. Hooray. Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering what you thought is the scope for doing any kind of LGBTQ dramas in countries where there's still a lot of anti-feeling, you know, places like some of the African countries.
Well, I'd probably be murdered, really. Yeah, I mean,
32
hopefully.
countries in the Commonwealth, you can still be
lashed or executed.
Two
or
of them you can
harmed.
still be killed.
Yeah.
And that's in the British Commonwealth.
Yeah, that's astonishing, isn't it? It's like, I mean, the good thing is now that drama's global and you can get these things, so you can stream them illegally or you can find them. So I think the solution is obviously you're not going to go into that country. The broadcasters in that country are not going to commission us. But the more you make, the more it gets seen. People will be watching this.
It's very true, actually. The global reach of shows made here will have...
And not just things like Game of Thrones that have gay stories in them. You know, it's like they're being seen in every territory in the world. So it's stealth partly, and partly it's not stealth, partly it's a big attack. But
You want the pincer movement, you want stealth and jazz hands. You want both of those.
That's the title of my autobiography.
Yeah, exactly. Really sensitive low-key stories.
Stealth and jazz hands, that's
Here I am! It's been an absolute treat to be with you today, and I'd like to thank and give such love to my wonderful panel, to Nicola, Russell, Courtney. And